So we have Pardhu Gunnam and Mars Lan, co-founders of Metaphor Data. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you, Ben, for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
So you folks are the creators of an open source project called DataHub. And we will talk a lot about general topics related to DataHub, but not completely. So first of all, what is DataHub? Okay, so let's start there. What is DataHub?
Sure. DataHub, in one sentence, it's a metadata platform or metadata foundation upon which you can build a bunch of interesting applications to solve use cases. But to understand why DataHub came about in the first place, it's probably helpful to talk about the backstory, how it was developed by LinkedIn and how it was subsequently open source and whatnot. I think that would definitely help to understand why this thing was even created in the first place and what it's trying to solve.
And by the way, metadata systems like DataHub, for some reason, they came out roughly around the same time, several of them. So I'm assuming the people who created these different systems encountered similar problems. And to what extent did you folks coordinate with each other?
Yeah, actually, that's very interesting. I think there's a couple of projects, some got open source and some not. Mostly came from big tech company, essentially around the same time. Arguably, DataHub is probably the granddaddy of them all. The whole thing dated back at this point probably 6-7 years ago when it first came out of LinkedIn. So yeah, but then very shortly after, a bunch of other tech companies, including I think Netflix, Lyft, Uber, a bunch of these tech companies that are sort of very data centric, or put out either blog posts and actual open sourcing actual project around this area. And I think you're right. I mean, this is kind of the typical things about invention, right? You see that when someone invented something, everybody else sort of invented around the same time, not just like a single person, because that's kind of the whole greater ecosystem sort of evolve towards that. Yeah.
So generally, most of the big tech companies started having issues around what? Data discovery, data lineage. What exactly were you folks trying to solve?
Right. So I mean, we can certainly speak a lot for LinkedIn, but I think other folks, other companies are probably very similar to that regard. LinkedIn was one of the data leader in this field. Essentially, they pride themselves of democratizing data. Right. Obviously, they collect a lot of valuable data around sort of professional developments and whatnot, careers and all that, and companies and job opportunities and whatnot. It's a very interesting data set, and then they keep growing, not just in the amount of data, but also the variety of data, right? As the platform get more and more feature introduced, and then they start collecting all different facets of data. And then, fairly early on, Jeff Winter, the ex-CEO of LinkedIn, said, hey, LinkedIn is not a consumer company, it's a data company, right? So there's definitely a huge drive internally trying to create this data culture that is self-service and democratized, right? And I think, in fact, the data team, I don't know, it was like probably in the 500s or so at the time when we were left LinkedIn, and maybe even more at this point. So you have a huge number of people trying to dig into these data and then try to make sense of the data and try to derive insights, both for LinkedIn's customers as well as internal use. Right? So and at this point, this juncture is when things start getting interesting, where there have been a lot of technology developed around how to scale the data, right? We are able to process more data, we're able to store more data, we're able to derive more data at scale, much bigger scale. But nothing scale was the human side of the story, right? I mean, when you have more and more people coming in and then they're trying to really collaborate, that's when things started to break down, because there isn't a good tool to help them with that. But the data,
yeah.
sorry.
So people, so there were tools for data scientists to collaborate, but this sounds even more fundamental. It's collaborating around data, sharing data, trusting data, discovering data, and in fact, I think if I go back and reread a lot of these announcement posts for this metadata management systems, a lot of them kind of settled around these kind of issues, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah, like what just to add, a lot of collaboration tools existed between communities, right? Like for how data scientists collaborate among themselves, or data analysts collaborate among themselves, or
right.
data engineers collaborate among, like, but how do you enable collaboration across these groups, across the company, right? Like that's something which was a big gap. And there were pocketed tools, like a lot of business users were using specific query tools like Elation, or someone was using engineering tools or observability tools built specifically for data engineers. But like there is so much of synergy between the information that can be shared across these groups. Yeah.
And as Mars pointed out, so the two mega trends here is there's more people using data, and more people who have jobs that rely on data, and they want to trust that data. And there's a certain amount of real-time ness to the data that they want, but all in the context of trusting the data and being able to find it, right? So anyway, so fast forward, you folks decided to start this company, Metaphor Data, which, by the way, full disclosure, I'm an advisor to. So what is the origin story? So why did you folks decide to start a company?
So let me give a little bit of brief history around that. So DataHub and LinkedIn initially started to solve one use case, which is search and discovery, help people to find data. But quickly, a major use case took over the entire stack and ecosystem, which is GDPR, right? Compliance, which was a huge deal back then.
Yep.
For all big tech companies. And then the two are very intertwined if you think about it, right? Compliance, sort of the very basic stuff about compliance is you have to first know what you have. If you don't know what you have, you don't know how to deal with them. So you don't know whether you're compliant. So of course that visibility and then seeing the whole, cataloging the whole ecosystem and whatnot is kind of a fundamental piece for compliance. But on top of that, of course, we built this platform which allows us to power various GDPR related operations inside of LinkedIn. Right? So this is kind of essentially programmatic access, if you will, where certain job will wake up and then console the metadata service and take instructions on what to do, how to be compliant in terms of its operations, how to lock down the access if it's PIIs and whatnot. So it's all tightly related to that.
So there's a lot of automation.
There's definitely a lot of automation per se, right? And then, but then ultimately, there's also a huge human component associated with it. It's not just purely machines, right? I mean, human will basically is still the best judge to come and tell the machine, hey, look, this is, what kind of data is it, and how should you actually appropriately handle it based on the definition. Machine don't derive that automatically. It's still human. That's there's still the human interface there. So after that, after we successfully solved GDPR for LinkedIn, we realized that, hey, look, we already have two use cases making use of the metadata. There are many other use cases that can also benefit from this connected metadata graph that we built. And there are a bunch of use cases that sort of came after that. For example, obviously the discovery things started from just purely data set and start expanding into things like metrics, dashboard, machine learning features, schema, APIs, etc. All these things, people want to discover, throughout the company, and they're all data related, one way or the other, depending on where you are in the stack, right? So obviously that pure discovery function got expanded, but there's also a huge push inside of LinkedIn on AI and ML ops. Right, lifecycle management of AI and ML. I build a model, right? Is this model ready for production? Is it still being experimented? How was the performance of it? Oh, is it deprecated? So on and so forth.
Yeah. And on the model training side, there started to be open source tools for experiment management like ML Flow. So in many ways, you're like an ML Flow for data in some ways, right?
In a great extent, yes. It's kind of like the whole lifecycle management, right? Because you don't just write a model and throw it over the wall, right? There's a lot of process involved in doing that. So that, and then that is all metadata, right? And it's tightly related to the data itself as well. So that is definitely a huge use case inside of LinkedIn. And then also end-to-end lineage, right? This is like, from cradle to grave, right? Where did the data come from at the very source? And then what does it go through, right? In different level of abstraction, right? Maybe it was bits and bytes at one point, but then it get abstracted into features, machine learning feature, and then get abstracted into machine learning model. So that's sort of the whole.
By the way, Mars, tying this to MLOps, if you talk to MLOps engineers, one of the key reasons when they look at a model and find that, hey, we need to retrain this model or something's wrong with this model, when they trace it back, it's usually some broken pipeline, right?
Oh, totally, right. Some broken pipeline, right? And then some data was broken. But yeah, you're completely right. You have to have that visibility end to end in order to debug something, right? That's almost a given. So that is also another use case that was developed inside of LinkedIn on top of DataHub.
So you've got discovery, GDPR compliance, ops around data generally, so from data ops to ML ops, which includes lineage.
That's right. And then there's also a big governance piece coming as well.
Change management.
Right. Change management, definition, right? Metric definition, all these sort of stuff that are sort of organizational challenge in terms of governance. That is also a big piece of DataHub. And actually many more that was sort of planned in the pipeline.
What about the stuff that data architects talk about, like schema evolution, change, data capture, right? So
yes, that is definitely also part of it. We sort of lump that onto discovery, which is kind of bringing visibility, right? So when you look at the schema, obviously you want to see what was the last, when did it change, what was the last schema, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that is definitely part of, we sort of put it under the discovery umbrella.
And as I think from what I remember, DataHub was like a pool model, right? So basically, if someone changes something, you folks just kind of remember. Recognize the change, right? So.
We call that push model, but in fact, it supports both, right? Yeah. Even inside the LinkedIn and the open source model, open source project, it supports both, right? Push is kind of obviously the preferred way because you only have to send things when something changes, right? And then you only have to send minimum amount of data, and then you get real-timeness through that. But a lot of times, some system is just easier to crawl and grab an entire snapshot and then just update it on a regular basis. Right. So we do support both form of ingestion, and this is kind of, we're probably one of the few project out there or product out there that supports it. So most of the product is still mostly just based on pool-based model where the crawler just wake up every night and grab everything and rewrite everything. So
by the way, you haven't answered my question of why you started the company.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, we I think where Mars was leading with this thing was when we saw a bunch of these use cases when we open sourced in Feb 2020. What the insight what we got was a lot of companies who were trying to use DataHub and also understand like how does that fit into their set of problems and stuff, which really inspired us that and help us understand what's the gap in the out there and why it's not about just big companies which are trying to scale the data, but like how this problem exists like throughout the ecosystem right now. And we wanted to really bring this capabilities and like these functionalities to like available for every company out there. That's why we created Metaphor, to bring the same principles of what we learned from like DataHub and like build give those capabilities to them. Yeah.
So one thing that I don't know if I've mentioned to you folks is that there are point solutions for each of the things that Mars described. But somehow you've got this metadata fabric that can serve as a foundation for a system that can do multiple things. Is this part of the value prop or thesis of the company?
You're completely right. I mean, we consider that as almost as a differentiator for especially DataHub versus other projects out there, right? Like you said, it's not very hard to build a point solution, right? If you say, hey,
like
look,
a data catalog or something, right? So,
exactly, right? I just want to solve the discovery problem. Let me just build that, right?
Yeah.
And then you probably will end up building it faster as well, right? Because you have a very confined space.
Yeah.
And as engineers, we tend to say, hey, look, that's, narrow down the problem rather than broaden the problem, right? Narrow it down, narrow the scope so we can deliver exactly what people ask for, which is all well and good, except based on our experience at LinkedIn, right? This is our first-hand experience, right? Metadata is such a cross-cutting thing, right? Its real power is you bring that out by being cross-cutting, not by being very vertical about it. So that's why we spend a whole lot of effort thinking about the architecture. How do we build a platform that is capable of onboarding any kind of metadata you want easily, and then present it back to the user in a way that's very easy to build applications that, whether it's serving human or serving programmatic access or serving analytical workflow, you need to be able to satisfy all that in order to call yourself a generalized metadata platform. And that's kind of what DataHub is, which is that foundational piece that allow additional stuff to be built on top.
So 2 questions. The first is, so is the focus of the company on this foundational layer, or the company will also build some of these applications and solutions on top? And then secondly, I know that you're no longer basing yourself completely on DataHub. So what's the relationship between Metaphor's foundation and DataHub?
So the first part, what you asked us about, like, yes, we are not completely focused only on bringing out this platform, but we are also starting one of the most common denominator of like the most common problems of all these use cases, which is search and discovery, right? Like actually, we think about it, like a lot of the other use cases need that, and like it kind of ties in well at like different sizes of the companies, different states of the data stack evolutions and stuff. So we Metaphor as such is focusing on both search and discovery as an application, and also while having the underlying metadata platform, which is capable to build multiple other use cases. Yeah.
And then the second question is, what is the foundation's relationship? What is the foundational layer, that metadata management system? How does that relate to DataHub?
Sure. So I think it's nice to put an analogy here that to help people understand a little bit, like what is DataHub and what is Metaphor? What is, for example, Acro, which is another company that is based on Metaphor. What is all that, right? How does that tie together? The way we look at DataHub is we kind of look at it as a foundational piece and technology as well. A good analogy to give here would be, say, for example, TensorFlow, right? TensorFlow is an absolutely awesome technology, and a great open source project, and a great machine learning frameworks and whatnot. But normal company wouldn't be able to just take TensorFlow and then solve the problem magically. From TensorFlow to solving machine learning problem, there's a big gap in there, right? And in fact, just look at how many companies started around TensorFlow would already tell you that there's a big gap there.
Right.
So a lot of managed TensorFlow service, or hey, my stuff built on top of TensorFlow, but makes your life easier in developing machine learning model, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we look at DataHub. It's kind of that, hey, that foundational piece, that is a great concept, a great technology, etc. But that itself doesn't solve any business problem, right? You need to have actual, solution that actually solve people's problem. But because you have this solid foundation, so your solution will be sound as well. And then you can also change your solution, build your solution, evolve your solution over time, without having to tear out your foundation every time when you do that. So I think that sort of analogy can help people to understand, what is DataHub, the open source project? Like I said, great fundamental piece for metadata versus an actual product and service that help you to solve your business use case, search and discovery, for example, governance, for example, et cetera, et cetera.
So Pardhu, you mentioned one of the first applications you folks are building is around discovery.
Yes.
So what is the difference between a discovery tool that uses this metadata management system and one that does not? So why is the one that uses metadata management superior in some ways?
I think like tying it back to what we mentioned about, right? Like if you think discovery tool, which is really built as a point solution, right? Like it only solves that problem, and like including any signals around like your neighboring like environments. Like for example, what is the compliance part of it? What is the quality part of it? Or what is the observability part of it? Enabling those things essentially like requires like significant higher amount of effort, or higher, like it makes your discovery experience like switching between different tools or integrations and things. That's what the platform enables you, like, which is seamlessly enables you to like seamlessly integrate with like different parts of the data ecosystem to make your discovery complete, right? Like which.
Yeah. You wrote a post where you said there's different types of metadata that makes your discovery tool much better, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of it is based on metadata, it turns out.
It is. So we have, even this is kind of a revelation for us while building DataHub inside LinkedIn. Initially, how we started thinking about it is purely a technical metadata problem, right? Like we didn't even differentiate it like as technical metadata back then, because we thought that's the only type of metadata that's really available. So we integrated with all the systems and said that, hey, this is about like how effectively you integrate and like automate collection of this metadata into one place and make it available. But it's like levels of unlocking. Once we unlock the problem, we saw that like more set of problems and like hardships in adoption across the consumers, right? Then that led us to understand, dig deeper, why people are really not able to effectively do data discovery, though we have provided all the information in one place. That's what led to the understanding of, no, within the metadata, there is technical metadata which comes from your systems and ecosystem. But there is business side of the metadata, which is coming from your business people, or like how the data is actually being used in the business, that business context. And the third and like most important piece of all is actually the behavioral metadata. Which people are using what kind of the data and for what, and how they're using it, where they're using is extremely important, not just the technical details. So combining these three kind of, we believe, is the real secret sauce to unlock the effective data discovery, search and discovery across your ecosystem. And that's what Metaphor is actually essentially focusing on.
So Mars, so Metaphor today, what is the current implementation in terms of a listener who wants to try it out? Like, what does the listener have to do to implement Metaphor today?
So when we came out,
what does the listener have to do, and what does the listener have to have?
Right. So when we came out on LinkedIn, one thing, once again from our experience on the open source, is that most company wanted a fully managed solution. I mean, there are companies who are willing to roll their own, right? Take the open source project and then integrate into their system and whatnot. But those are far and few between, and kind of only belong to the high tech of the high tech, right? Most companies will say, hey, this is not my core competency. Much as nobody is gonna go and build a Jira system, right? Why? Right? You can, but why? You wouldn't do it. It's not your core competency. This whole data catalog and metadata stuff, a lot of time it's the same thing as well, right? People will say, hey, look, my core competency is, dealing with my specialized data, and then, turn my, and then make changes, impacts on my business, right? I'm not gonna go and build my data warehouse, right? I will just buy some solution. Likewise, it's the same thing for us. So we focus on this a lot. We want to build the best cloud native metadata platform / data discovery product for our customers, such that they have minimally work needed in order to integrate and then run the system, right? And in fact, because it's fully managed, they don't even have to monitor, run it, or anything like that. They just essentially get it up and running. So we spend a huge amount of time making sure that this integrate well with the system, and then also any onboarding process will be a breeze essentially. And then it's a breeze in multiple ways. It's a breeze not just in, oh, I'll give you the username and password and then be done with it. No, it also has to be done in a very secure way, right? So company don't feel uncomfortable, giving away access that they don't feel comfortable to. So you have to do it in such a way that it's easy but also secure. That way, you sort of unblock people from adopting to such a system. So to us right now, it's literally maybe a couple hours work with an engineer in order to set this up, and then that's it, right? They will be able to run it continuously going forward, and then we will keep pushing out new updates so the product get better and better. That's kind of all automated. They don't have to worry about any of those things.
So Pardhu, so let's say I deploy Metaphor. What are some of the first few things I can do with it that will convince me that this is the right direction for a company to go to? So what were some of the early feedback you got from users?
So one of the things what Metaphor unlocks immediately out of the box is, of course, after the smooth and the integration of onboarding experience, is immediately gives you exposure to important rich insights within your data ecosystem, right? Like what is being the most useful, what is not just by simple queries and stuff, but profiling it with respect to who the users are, which kind of roles, and how are they related to you and stuff, right? And one of the apart from that is something which we automate and integrate from every ecosystem, right? But what we have also enabled is for people to kind of interact with the data as seamless, how they integrate, how they interact with, how they interact with any other well-established products, understanding what is the context behind creation of this, where should I use this, what is the business use case I should enable by using this, and when, and most importantly, when is the times when I shouldn't be using this, right? That kind of information. And when we thought about it, our approach is that most of the traditional systems kind of are very much top down, or source to destination driven. Somewhere in the data producer world, you define what this column is meant to be, and that is the description which flows across your entire ecosystem. This is absolutely right. That's the right description about the thing. But as we see, the biggest gap is that how people consume it or how people translate it into their own use case is extremely localized into that group or that role or that particular use case, and there is no real place for capturing this information. That's what Metaphor enables. Combine your technical and the producer views and informations with the consumer views, which is consumer side of the stories, which helps people to kind of share the insights across the groups and overall improve your data literacy in your company.
So Mars, in terms of engineering moving forward, so you have this metadata foundation. How much? So what are some of the engineering priorities moving forward? Because you have this metadata foundation, which I assume, since it's proven at scale at LinkedIn, is pretty solid. So it's just a matter of having integration with these modern data platforms, right? So it's the Snowflakes, Databricks, so on and so forth, Redshift, BigQuery. So what on the engineering side, on the foundation, what else needs to be done?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, the integration stuff is going to be ongoing, essentially, right? Because there will always be new systems that come out. But also, there's also another piece that a lot of vendors sort of overlook is, when you come to real big enterprises, right? They not only will they have a very diverse stack, they will have probably some legacy system and whatnot, but there will also be a lot of homegrown systems. Right? These companies will say, hey, I have a feature store that we build internally, or we have this, dashboarding system we build internally, or we have this, some jerry-rig thing that takes Google Sheet and then turn it into some reports and whatnot, right? You're gonna come across tons of those things, and then you cannot go to these people and say, hey, look, change your behavior, right? Change the way you do things in order to work with the system, right? That is not an acceptable answer. How do you make sure that you can easily integrate even with these sort of homegrown system is an interesting challenge, right? How do you make sure that they can easily take those metadata and then put it into the metadata graph and then service it back? That is kind of a very interesting technical challenge there. And I think that our initial choice of making this a generalized metadata model helps a lot when it comes to this sort of thing, because we say, hey, look, we're not going to be very opinionated about how the data model should look like. We want to be able to make it so it's easily extendable. So in that case, when you come across one of these proprietary systems, you can say, hey, it's very easy for you to integrate. The amount of effort needed is very minimal. So yeah, there's definitely that part.
Mars, what about sometimes because we work in analytics and machine learning and AI, we're focused on these kind of analytic warehouses. But I mean, some of these transactional systems have thousands and thousands of tables, right? So
yeah,
but then I guess the point is they feed into a warehouse. Yeah. But do you guys still care about the underlying source transactional schema?
Yeah, so this is once again harken back to the end-to-end lineage story, right? Yeah. Sure, you can start your journey just from the data warehouse, and then certain group only care about, like you said, the analysts and the data scientists. They probably only care about data warehouse onward. Right. But how did the data get in there, and where did it come from? Right? That's also the question that a lot of people are trying to answer. That also helps you to know whether you can trust the data. If you see, say, a Salesforce table in data warehouse, or you see 100 Salesforce data tables in data warehouse, which one is the right one, right? And then is this the one that came from our Salesforce DB, or did we actually purchase this from outside as a different data set? So you kind of want to have that visibility all the way up. And then it also, once again, like helps debug things. If something goes wrong, you can take a look at it, the full lineage, understand where it went wrong. And also from a data architect point of view, right? That's kind of a dream come true, because now you have an automatically curated map of your data ecosystem, right? You can zoom in and look at how things are and anytime. Right? You never need to draw your architecture diagram anymore, because that's a live architecture diagram that you have right there. So
have you guys gotten to the point where you have some use cases that have some that are much more complex than just one warehouse, for example? Just multiple. I mean, people are really blown away that they can finally now understand the lay of the land.
There is certainly cases like that. Even though currently we're trying to focus on the so-called modern data stack company, right, which kind of more or less homogeneous in that sense. Most people have, Snowflake / BigQuery / Redis at their data warehouse.
And Databricks.
And Databricks as well, Lakehouse right there, right? So, and a couple of things, right? Standardized BI, maybe using dbt for transform, et cetera, right? So that stack is reasonably homogeneous. But like I said, as you go up the food chain and get into like bigger company, very quickly it becomes very diverse, right? And then in fact, we've come across company where they told us, hey, I bet you anything that's invented in the past 20 years or so, data-wise, we have a copy of it in-house, right? So there will definitely be company like that as well. So your system cannot just say, hey, look, because we are focusing just on these things, so that's all we can do. No, you cannot, right? You have to be able to extend easily into all these other systems as the requirements come in.
So Pardhu, as Mars was describing the origin story and the use cases inside LinkedIn, right? So he kind of rattled off several. You folks are starting off with the metadata foundational layer and then data discovery. So are there plans to add another kind of set of applications? And if so, what would those be?
Yeah. So some of the things which we started, like which are very, very adjacent for us, are and like which came up as part of our discovery with our customers as well, and inside LinkedIn as well, right? So one is discovery is more on enabling your consumers to understand how the data is and stuff. But at the same time, there is a lot of incentive for the data engineering part of the world as well, right? Like, which is beyond, of course, enabling your true goals is like enabling self-service and democratization in your company, and like help with like root cause analysis, debug using the Lineage, or this is the common pieces what we see with our current application as well, right? But new interesting use cases are which we often hear biggest pain points for data engineering side of the world are like impact analysis. So it is before, like, if you think data is like your production, which used to happen more in the services world, right? Like, how do you implement any change, or whom do you need to communicate? How do you like even perform that change, right? Like smoothly without affecting your systems. Like these days, data is treated as like production system. So how do you handle those kind of changes smoothly with your customers? That's one of the primary use cases which we will be focusing as well. And the second part of it, which is very much connected, is you have seen this thing around, like when we talk about companies with even like 300, 500 people company and ask like, how big is your data team? It's like 10, maybe under 15, with like what they talk about is core data engineers and analytics. And who are your consumers? They just smile and say like entire company, right? Which is, there's a huge scaling problem in terms of the actual data engineering team versus the actual data consumers, which is essentially the entire company. So the data engineers are also looking at how effectively are they deploying their resources to get the best ROIs in the company. And when I say our resources, not just in terms of the actual the data resources, like, or which includes your Snowflake bills or your Databricks bills, etc., but like also how effective is their time where they're spending in like making sure smoothing out the performance of a model, or improving the efficiency of like a particular query, like, which is kind of understand, right? So that's another use case which we are trying to like enable next, in terms of help data engineers understand what your data ecosystem is, not just from like what exists, but like how it is being used and what's the ROI end to end. Like if you think from like as an organization. Yep.
So what about taking it a step further? And I'm not saying you guys should build this, but what is the? It seems like you can help address some of these data quality issues, but I don't know to what extent you actually want to build a data quality solution. But there might be some areas where you can at least say, hey, this data is being used a lot. Maybe this is where we should devote our data quality resources, right? So
actually, since you're on the usage part, right, that's actually a much deeper question than most people think, right? Because when you say, hey, is this table being used? Is it being used often? People immediately think of, oh, let me just go to query log or some access log to figure out whether it has a large number there, right? But that actually doesn't represent the actual use, right? Because guess what? You have pipeline that runs every day and then move millions of data from one place to another, right? That doesn't mean someone's actually using it, right? And then you might be, building up producing all these tables, right? And then thinking that it's important. But in reality, when you actually look at it, nobody's actually using it to create a dashboard, or nobody's actually looking at the data. No human's actually looking at it at all. It's just all machine accessing, moving things because you ask it to in the first place, right? So the usage part is not as trivial as, I just take a look at the access log and then figure it out, right? Because any pipeline that being set up by data engineer, by definition, will have usage because you have pipeline that runs every day. So you cannot tell whether one is more important than the other, or one is actually being used than the other. And that sort of come back to the same thing, right? How do you migrate things, right? Or now I want to move this table to there. Is it safe for me to do that? If I want to change the column, is it safe for me to do that? Who should I talk to? If that were the case, right? You have no ideas about it if you just look at the access log.
Right. And so the companies that you're talking to, are they what level of maturity do you have to be in order to engage with a tool like this, I guess is my question, right? So there's the there's the companies that we see around here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but there's data is everywhere these days. So what kinds of companies are the right companies to be thinking about a solution like Metaphor?
I think we thought like maybe a size of the company is a proxy for engagement at this stage and stuff, but it is true. But like what we have also realized is with the whole advent of modern metadata stack, or modern data stack, right? Like irrespective of, I'm seeing that like even smaller size of the companies are actually doing a lot more data actions or like data using data than much more deeper than what it used to be like 5 years ago. Like that, I think in that way, all these technologies and companies have succeeded in enabling companies to democratize certain parts of the data, right? So that's why these set of problems, what we are trying to tackle in terms of data discovery and like an understandability, are even common for any modern data stack adopted companies, even if they're like 100+ people. Anything less than that, I would say that like the resolving the human part of the problem is not that difficult, given the size is too small. But like any company beyond 100 and more, and like adopted modern data stack and truly data driven, have this set of problems.
I have a good yardstick here, right? So if you go to and then ask the data team and say, is there one person in your company that can tell you everything about how the data is created and then consumed and all that? If you can find that one person, then you probably don't need a tool like this, right? But as soon as you say, hey, look, actually, I cannot confidently say that, we, even as the whole data engineering team as a whole, is able to tell you how data is being produced and used inside the company, then that's when this problem arises, when they need a solution like this.
So looking ahead, like in a year or two, of course, I know what you folks are going to say, given that you are making a bet on metadata management systems, right? So, but looking ahead in a year or two, are we going to see many of these applications dependent or connected to a modern metadata management system? By applications, I mean data discovery, data catalog, data quality, and so on and so forth, compliance, and so on and so forth. Is the metadata management system going to be a fundamental building block, much more so than it is today?
Absolutely. And tying back to your like earlier question, like how are we thinking about data quality? That's essentially how we are approaching it as well, right? Like you will see that essentially it's a bidirectional requirement as well. Like all these data quality systems or observability systems or compliance systems need an aspect of metadata like beyond its ecosystem, which is like, hey, I am this data set, this is the quality, but who is the owner for it, or which are the groups who are using it if I have to like alert a report anything inside the data quality.
And
at the same time,
by the way, as you were saying that, I just recalled that actually I chaired many conferences in the past in this topic, for example, Strata Data. And around the time that these metadata management systems, I was putting on talks from all these open source projects, right? So surely a lot of that education is starting to pay off. So do you folks still have to explain what metadata is?
Definitely less so than we initially anticipated. I think when we first started this journey, right, people still not very sure what metadata is, right? In fact, I recall some of the conversations.
Or they know it, but then they may not know that they need a system.
Yes, that's 100% correct, right? And actually, here is a good point where we will refer to your listener to a great article written by Ben Stencil, who's the co-founder of Mode. The title of the blog post is called "The Modern Data Experience," right? And then it gave a very, very great metaphor, right, on what's the data experience. It's like going to a restaurant eating, right? So, how would you say that it's a great experience eating at a restaurant, right? It's not determined by how quickly the chef is able to chop the onions, right? It's not determined by how fast people can flip the burger or how many dishes they can churn out from the kitchen, right? It's not even about just the quality of the food either, right? It's about the whole experience, right? Including the atmosphere, including the waiter, waitress, including everything, right? That's your dining experience, so to speak. And this is where we see the data will be moving towards, right? We have a lot of the modern data stack sort of unlock these verticals, right? So you now have very fast chopping machine that's able to help you to speed things up, or you have a great storage that can store all the ingredients you want in the world, etc., etc. But that doesn't automatically lead to an experience where people will say, hey, we are actually leveraging the data that as we ought to do for the company, for the business, etc. Right? And that's the missing piece that we're trying to tackle here. And then we strongly believe metadata played a huge role in that. And a platform that's horizontal cutting is almost critical to that experience. And the reality is nobody will care about that,
right?
Other than us, right? Because everyone, when you're focusing on, I want to make the best cutting knife, I want to make the best chopping board, right? Everybody will be focusing on just that piece, and they're rightfully to do so. That's necessary. You need to have that, right? You need to have the best tool in each vertical, but you also need this horizontal piece that strings everything together in order to provide an experience to human, right? So that they will say, hey, look, I really enjoy dining here versus some other places, right? That's the difference. And then that's where we're trying to make a difference as well.
Hey, Pardhu, actually, even with the data discovery, right? So now actually there's data discovery tools now that don't rely on this modern metadata platform. But the point is, if you use a tool like Metaphor, you're probably going to get a better data discovery tool out of the box. But then you also benefit from the fact that you already have this foundational layer that
absolutely
that down the road will serve you well, right?
Absolutely, and that was well embedded in our history as well. Like at LinkedIn, when we created DataHub, like with a couple of use cases, we didn't. It was very easy for us to unlock the next set of use cases because the platform was there, and we didn't commit to the use cases while building the platform. But we built in a way that, seeing a couple of prominent use cases around compliance, search and discovery, we created naturally a generalized metadata platform, and it served us well to really expedite unlocking new set of use cases across domains, really. And that's the same thing what our customers also would experience working with Metaphor.
So as far as the company, so who's going to unlock the other use cases? So what's the plan? Is it going to be Metaphor itself, or?
I think it's definitely gonna be a mixture of things, right? We cannot possibly unlock every single use cases ourselves, and then I don't think that should be what we'll be doing anyway either. I mean, there will be certain important things like search and discovery, like what Pardhu mentioned. It's kind of such a critical piece. It's almost like a doorway into the platforms. You kind of have to have it there. But for things like data quality, right, and all these data observability and all these other tools, they will be best-in-class tools there that solve that use case. So it's incumbent upon us to integrate well with them rather than, hey, try to build something to compete with them in those fields. That doesn't make sense for us to do. It's not our core competency. So yeah, I think there will be certain use cases that's very fair game for us to work on, but I would imagine a lot more will be more on the integration side rather than on just go ahead and build your wall garden, so to speak.
And to close, let's give Pardhu the final word. I'm sure you're hiring. What are you hiring for?
So that's one thing we realized. You should always have your hiring hat on as a part of your growing startup culture. And yeah, we do are looking for various roles across engineering and go to market. But our primary focus is the full stack developers who are extremely passionate about building systems and distributed systems, and also passionate about building data applications in this domain. Yeah.
Remote or on-site?
We are completely remote first company. In fact, even our team is kind of spread. We don't have a physical office, and we all work as remote first.
Okay. Yeah, we already have people from 4 cities at this point working in the company, span across multiple time zones. So yeah.
So moving forward, it'll stay that way.
Yes. It will most likely stay that way. Yes.
And with that, thank you, Mars and Pardhu.
Right. Thank you, Ben.